Okay, so it's Chandra here speaking about Chiron's transit through Aries. And even though I've mentioned this in various talks throughout the year, Chiron's continuing to be in Aries for another, was it 18 months or something like that? So it's really worthwhile understanding something about Chiron. So I'll be talking about the mythological Chiron, the historical Chiron, Chiron's transit through Aries 2019 to 2027, the Chiron return, both for individuals and the planet, and a tiny bit about Chiron when it gets to Taurus. Oh, let me go back. I just wanted to show you that image. Hang on a second, I'll get my pointer. So if this is the sun here in the middle, you can see the orbit of Jupiter, you see the orbit of Saturn, you see the orbit of Uranus, all nice cylindrical ones. And then you see the orbit of Chiron, which is this, what they call an elliptical orbit. It goes out past Uranus and cuts in through Saturn. Yeah. And so that is the reason why we refer to Chiron as the Rainbow Bridge, because it bridges Saturn and Uranus. Now let's talk about the mythology. As I said, it's elliptical. It's the bridge between Saturn, which is the planet that we can see with our naked eye, the furthest out we can see with the naked eye, and Uranus, the first of the transpersonal planets. And because of this elliptical orbit, then Chiron creates a bridge. Chiron's also associated with the mythological creature, the centaur. And then because of this bridge between Saturn, a worldly, earthly, karmic planet, and Uranus, the first of the transpersonal, it's the bridge between the material and the spiritual. Astrologers have been working with Chiron since it was discovered in 1977, and we have realised that it's got a great deal to do with the self-help movement that sort of really erupted in the late 70s and on into the 80s and 90s. But it's also associated with one's vulnerability. So on the one hand, it's about the merger of the personal self and the soul. But in order for that to happen, the Achilles heel, the weak points, the area where the ego really fights to stay in control, is always indicated by the Chiron. So it's very useful for you to understand where the Chiron is in your chart. Now, I don't know if any of you remember the books on the Narnia series. They were written for children, are written by C.S. Lewis in I actually don't know when he wrote them, maybe the 50s. And it's a series of books of children who leave the physical world and they go through a wardrobe. They go through a wardrobe into another realm and another reality. And they encounter all kinds of adventures and things, but one of their encounters is very strongly connected to the centaurs. And the centaurs are, I was going to say servants, that's not quite the right word. They're co-workers for the main central character in this series called Aslan. And Aslan is the godlike, or he's a lion, and he's associated with the wisdom and compassion. And the centaurs are a bridge between the different parts of the realm. And so if you want to understand something about Chiron, this is a wonderful series to look at, the Narnia series. And I think it might be in the second book, when the children who've travelled through the wardrobe to the inner world are supported by the centaurs to get to what they call Cair Paravel. And we know theosophically Cair Paravel is similar to Shambhala. Yeah. Anyway, it's a big story, but it's a story associated with our search for the mystical, for the wondrous, for the divine, and how to get literally from our physical world through to the spiritual and to bring the energy back. Now, astrologers sometimes debate or argue about the rulership, but I particularly adhere to this particular version, which is that Chiron rules Virgo. And the reason why I think Chiron rules Virgo is because it is to do with the self-help movement. It's not about having someone else heal oneself. It's about hands-on. What do I have to do for myself and my life and my health to bring about healing? I believe that Chiron is elevated in the sign of Sagittarius because Sagittarius holds a vision and a hope and an aspiration towards a larger world beyond the physical. And the elevation simply means that Chiron functions well in Virgo and in Sagittarius. And then the opposite of Virgo being Pisces, it's said that Chiron tends not to function so well in Pisces. And maybe that's because we're waiting for someone else to save us, or maybe it's because we don't even realize that there's healing to be done and we've gone off down another path of materialism, maybe. And then because Gemini is the opposite of Sagittarius, then Chiron's said to fall in Gemini and really not function so well. And I would describe that to the fact that it's difficult to see the big picture, and it's often difficult to for the average person to have a connection to the Sagittarian realms when they've got Chiron and Gemini, because there's a tendency to get caught up in the mundane or the things closer to hand. Yes, and so just bear that in mind if you happen to have Chiron in Virgo or Sagittarius or Pisces or Gemini, you know. Okay, that's just a lovely image of the Care Paravel, the Shambhala, if you like, and the lion, which I think is interesting on an esoteric level because, of course, the lion is associated with Leo, and Leo is connected to the first initiation and the activation of the heart chakra and the beginning of the soul's taking control of one's incarnation. Now, in the story of Narnia, the children go through the veil into the royal kingdom. That's where we're all trying to get to when we get past our Achilles heel, in beyond the veil. And it's interesting what happens in the story because, of course, there's a parallel. And interestingly, C.S. Lewis, who wrote the book, was a very good friend of who's the guy who wrote the Lord of the Rings, the Tolkien. They were colleagues and friends, and they were part of a group of philosophers who used to meet. Anthroposophical sort of focus. So there's a sort of a mystical or a spiritual focus to it. Now, in this particular story, the kingdom was destroyed by the greed of Edmund, one of the children. Yeah? And the other three children, one of them had a sword, that was Peter, one had a vial of healing cordial, and one had bow and arrow. And then the main central character, Aslan, brought about immortality through selfless service and selfless sacrifice. So these are themes, Chiron themes, that are there in our life. We can't expect to follow the Chiron path unless we've got the equivalent of a magic sword or some sort of healing vial, some sort of weapons of spiritual strength, and some capacity to recognize that the ego can't come with us in its current form. I thought I'd show you a chart just to explain something about Chiron in the chart. Now, this is an example chart, and you'll see there's the planetoid Chiron, not a planet, planetoid. Looks like a K, a key, the letter K, with the circle underneath it. And of course, that's interesting because the circle's associated with the spiritual realms. So in this particular chart, Chiron's in Taurus. So we'd say, okay, well, the Achilles heel is something to do with maybe money or security or worldly matters or things of that nature, needing comfort. And then Chiron happens to also fall in the second house in this chart. And so you'd say, well, the Achilles heel, the vulnerability, is something to do with the habits or the sense of security or identification with the self. And of course, what happens, because Chiron is the bridge between Saturn and Uranus, whenever you're looking at Chiron in the chart, you must look at Saturn. There it is, sitting on the top of this chart in Capricorn on the midheaven, and you must look at Uranus. So we can hypothesize that this is a person that takes their responsibilities very seriously. They've got Saturn in Capricorn. And that these responsibilities are quite a weight, and maybe there's a tendency for depression. Something sometimes happens with Capricorn. And then if you look at Uranus, you'll notice that Uranus is on the ascendant here in Aries. So Uranus is to do with the breakthroughs, and that these two are square. Well, actually, that's the midheavens. It's a 6-degree square from Saturn down to Uranus, and it involves the midheaven and the ascendant. So clearly in this particular chart, there's a lot of tension between the responsibilities or the karma and the need to break through those responsibilities and find the self and not lose the self. And because I know whose this chart is, I think it's important to say that this particular individual had lots of issues associated with their health. And that's, of course, the ascendant, Uranus sitting on the ascendant. Yes, other things to say. The Saturn is in the 29th degree of Capricorn, so there's a need. The person's been carrying a significant amount of karma for a long time. Look, it could be worldly, it could be professional, it could be family karma. In this particular person's case, it was very strong family karma. And yes, we have that. I notice also that the moon and Chiron are fairly close together. Now, esoterically, the moon has a great deal to do with the personality. And there's a tendency when Chiron's not far away from the moon for the personality to kind of try and take charge. So I look at this chart and I say, okay, well, there's the personality trying to take charge through habits or safety or security. And here's the soul energy trying to have breakthroughs in order to begin a new cycle, complete certain karma, learn certain lessons associated with health. If you want to look at a chart, you say, well, which one of these has got the upper hand? Is it the ego? Is it the personality? Yeah, which we can see there, or is it the soul? I look at the trine that goes down, the blue lines that go from Uranus down to Mercury here in Leo. And I say, okay, well, there's a lot of insight and there's a lot of curiosity and possibly a strong interest in the metaphysical or study. So this is a person who is willing and ready and able to embrace the new and the different and the offbeat. And yet on the other hand, there's almost a sort of a hiding or an insecurity. So I just point those issues out so that when you look at your own chart, if you're trying to understand what's happening with my Chiron, you kind of know, well, you've got to look at the Saturn, look at the Uranus, and follow the aspects. Okay, I'll leave that and go on to the historical Chiron. Okay, so this is the chart for Chiron's discovery, 1:10 in the afternoon in New York, 1st of November, 1977. So this is what we call an event chart. And if this was a chart of an individual, we'd say it had the seed for the incarnation, the seed of possibilities for the entire incarnation. Because it's the birth of the discovery of a planetoid, we'd say, well, it's got something to do with the unfolding experience, I think, of humanity learning to work with the energy of Chiron. And because Chiron has a cycle that goes 49 or 50 years, then there's something about this chart that is connected to the first 49 or 50 years, starting from November 1977. Okay, so let's have a look at it. So we have 4 planets in Scorpio: Vulcan, the Sun, Uranus, and Mercury. So I'd say, okay, in order for humanity to actualize the potential of Chiron, humanity have to go through deep, deep Scorpio transformation. Yeah? The number 9, where the sun is in the degree of money. So I would hypothesize that humanity will have some transformational issues over the next 49, 50 years to do with money. And then because Uranus is there, there's a great spur or an incentive for change. And I would again hypothesize that a significant amount of humanity would be up for the challenge of moving from the personal to the transpersonal in their own individual lives, and hopefully in the collective of humanity. I looked at the Sabian symbol. There's Chiron. There it is down the bottom in 3 degrees and 8 minutes. We call that the 4th degree of Taurus. So like that example chart that I used, Chiron sitting there in Taurus, which means that there's an attachment to habits or to comfort or to security. And then at the time of the discovery of this planet, all these habits of the past seem to be obstructing the Aquarius rising, the need to move into what I would say would be the 21st century in the Aquarian energy. And therefore, the only way for humanity to move is to go through a fairly deep, profound transformation, catharsis, rebirth, and money's got something to do with it, I think, because of the 9th degree of Scorpio. The Sabian symbol for Chiron is a rainbow's pot of gold. So that's interesting because twice now we've seen the significator for money and or gold. So we'd say, well, what does the personality consider to be money? Well, that's money in the bank and it's wealth and all the power that goes with it. What does the soul consider to be the pot of gold? Well, surely that's compassion. Surely that's love. Surely that's care for others and for the planet. So it seems to me that what we value is fundamental to this transformation. And in order for us in the first 50 years of our working with Chiron, we have to fundamentally recognise that, what is it they say, that money is the root of all evil? Well, I don't think it is, but it's how we use it. If we use money for control or for power or for security, then we'll end up with none of the soul's gold. Okay, our Chiron is also conjunct the Earth, and the Earth is sitting there in the 9th degree of Taurus, directly opposite the Sun. And the Sabian symbol for that, it's actually the 10th degree, I beg your pardon, 912 Taurus, is a Red Cross nurse. So I think of a Red Cross nurse as, well, for me, that sort of brings forward the sort of sense of selfless service to those that need help. You know, whether it's an illness or an accident or whatever, the Red Cross nurses, they're there for selfless service. So that is also a bit of a clue. It says, forget about the self, look and see who you can help. So I think these are clues for all of us as to how we can best work with Chiron. Okay, other things that I notice in the chart is that Saturn sits right at the end of Leo, conjunct the fixed star Regulus. Now, the fixed star Regulus is, it's either to do with royalty on a worldly level or royalty on a spiritual level. And when I think of royalty on a spiritual level, I think again of compassion and caring about others and the concern for the group. That's the highest vibration of Regulus. And when I think of Saturn and Regulus on a worldly level, the image that comes to mind for me is Donald Trump crowning himself, you know, and making statues of himself as the ruler and the king. So it's the worldly power and the worldly king. Yeah. And so because this Chiron chart is for all of us who are interested in personal and spiritual growth, then we have to strive towards the highest and the finest qualities of the heart. That's the sign of Leo. And the other thing to notice is that Uranus, which is a very powerful transformational planet and the planet that is driving the transformation for humanity, Well, there's a trine down there to the moon, which I would take to, again, that sense of a significant amount of humanity's personalities are ready for the transformational growth. But in order to do that, we have to move through the 12th degree of Scorpio, which is fear. So there's lots of messages in this chart about moving beyond fear, recognizing that worldly or material value or money or power is not going to get us anywhere, and that somewhere we need to aspire to the selfless service. Okay, I shall leave that. Oh, and there's, of course, I mentioned the angular fixed grand cross. And I look at the angular fixed grand cross and I immediately think of the disciples of the world and say, okay, well, not everybody, and the astrologers have realized this, that not everybody responds to the planetoid Chiron. Some people just fail to even seem to notice the energy because they're not yet ready for that crossing of the bridge. But the angular fixed grand cross that's going this way here, down there, and up to Mars. So it's Chiron and Mars, and Vulcan and the Sun, and down to the ascendant. It's almost as if those that have a little more I don't know what's the word to say, those that have soul contact need to lead the way and need to take the risks and move forward. You can't wait for anybody else to be acting selflessly or developing compassion or moving beyond the transitory issues to do with money and power. Okay, let's have a look at what Chiron's been doing. I'm not going to go through all the signs of the zodiac, just a few of them. So in 1977, that was it, the 1st or 2nd of November, was on the rainbow's pot of gold. But the interesting thing about that 4th degree of Taurus is it governs, what do they call it? It's if you go to the doctor and they say the little bit of well, it's the ovula, and it's associated, it's at the back of the throat, and it's associated with speech and communication and singing and all sorts of self-expression. So to me, somehow or other, Chiron's connected to the free flow of speech. And I was reading something about, say, for instance, if a baby is born with damage to that part of the throat, then they'll have a speech impediment. Okay, so what's happened since the late 70s? Well, one of the things that I immediately think of is the rise of the global banking cartels, remembering the rainbow's pot of gold and remembering the Taurian energy. Yeah, so rather than just having banks in different nations or different countries, there have been the cartels that have come into place from the late 70s on with their goals of controlling, now that we're in the 21st century, world economy. Yes. Chiron moved into Gemini, I don't know exactly when, but sometime in the 80s. And most people had a telephone. Some people, by the end of the 80s, had a personal computer. The governments of the world, I know I was working, I think it might have been 1971, I was working for the federal government, state government in Brisbane, and we had 2 floors of computers that went from the floor to the ceiling, enormous things. 2 floors of an 11-story building was dedicated to computers. So that was in the, what did I say, early 70s. So by the time we've got the 80s, the global telecommunications and the computers are beginning to be sort of normal. And by the late 80s, many people had a personal computer. I've jumped a few signs there and I've gone on now to Chiron's transit of Scorpio. And the reason I decided to look at that was because I wanted to see what happened when Chiron opposed itself, meaning when Chiron got to the 4th degree, not of Taurus, but of Scorpio. And I discovered that this was in 1997 and that there was a financial crisis and a collapse of the Asian financial crisis, and I think they managed to contain it before it spread around the world. So I thought, well, that's interesting. There was a collapse of money and the cartels that had sort of started sort of rising in the 70s. And now I've jumped a little bit here and I've gone on to Chiron transiting Sagittarius. And this was from 99 through to 2001, just for a couple of years. And of course, by this stage, people starting to work with the internet, and not just the internet that's helpful, but the dark underbelly of the internet was also being used for criminals in those early stages. And because Chiron is both the method for healing and way of healing ourselves, we say, well, what are the benefits of Chiron in Sagittarius? Well, we can connect with everybody. We can talk to people on the other side of the planet. We realize that we're one humanity. But the downside of it is that it gets misused for the wrong motivations. Okay, continuing on. So I've jumped again and I've gone to Chiron transiting Aquarius here in January 2006, and you'll see that it was only a couple of years that Chiron was in Sagittarius. By the time you get to Aquarius, you see it's about 4 years. So this is the elliptical orbit. It's going slower through Aquarius and Pisces and Aries and Taurus. And I've looked at Aquarius because this is what we call the Chiron square. And when I looked up the Chiron square, I realised very quickly that the International Monetary Fund had started regulating the global banking. They wanted to sort of have a finger in the pies of all the banking of all the nations from a central place. And you could say, well, is that a good thing or not such a good thing? I don't think it's been good. Maybe there have been good things about it, because the Aquarian energy is either collaborative for the group, that's the second ray energy of Aquarius, or it's the holding of data on a fifth ray for the personality. Now, the other thing that happened after the sort of January 2006 was we'd had the Boxing Day tsunami. I think that was Boxing Day 2005, so a month later. So all of a sudden, we've got global networks that are connected to the World Wide Web that we can use for humanitarian aid. So that's just an example of the positive use of the Chiron with the square. And because the main, in the cycle of Chiron, over that 50-year cycle, the aspects that are important are the waxing square, the opposition, and the waning square. We also had in that period the iPhone in 2007, that now here we are, almost 20 years later, and we've got the smartphone and indeed the smart devices. And we had the internet and global communication, and I guess you'd say global travel exploded. So enormous freedom for the individuals to travel or to speak or to use technology. Obviously the benefits of Chiron in Aquarius, but the downside of it is, have we lost some of our privacy? Are we being surveilled, controlled, and if so, by whom? Okay, Chiron moved into Pisces in April 2010, and now you'll notice here that it then took, what was that? Not quite 9 years to move through Pisces. So slowing right down in Pisces, yeah? And that's not that long ago. So we can have a look and say, well, what happened? What happened to humanity when Chiron moved through Pisces? Did we get addicted to something? I wonder. I mean, some people would have got addicted to the spiritual life or the spiritual world or the spiritual practices. It's possible that some people became very addicted to materialism. Some people may have become, because Pisces has got a great deal to do with emotional attachments and therefore addictions. Or did humanity sleepwalk because we were given more and more and more toys to distract us from the big issues? So the other thing I think about Chiron moving through Pisces is that the great year, the is slowly coming to an end over a few decades or maybe even longer, and we've been witnessing a systemic breakdown of society on all kinds of levels from 2010 through to 2019. They're just some of my thoughts about Chiron moving through those signs. Let's have a look at Chiron transiting Aries. So February 2019, that's well, it's the beginning of the year before the COVID outbreak at the end of 2019, all the way through until May in 2027. So this is the cycle that we're currently in. Okay, so when I start to think about Aries, I immediately think, well, it's opportunities for a new cycle for humanity. But I also recognize that Aries can be a very, very headstrong sign when the personality is in charge of it. And so there may be a need to learn how do we manage our free will? Do we work for ourselves, or do we work for the good of the whole? And it seems to me that there are a significant amount of tests happening for humanity as Chiron's moved through Aries. What did I say? Since 2019 up until 2027. And Aries is one of the signs. There are, in order for humanity to progress from the ordinary wheel, the ordinary life, the ordinary world, and go across the bridge, that's Chiron, the rainbow bridge, to get to the spiritual, the spiritual life, the spiritual realities, the beginning of the spiritual realities, the fixed signs. There are a number of signs that converge upon the sign of Scorpio. Scorpio is the transformational sign that reverses everything. And Aries is one of the signs that converges upon the sign of Scorpio. And therefore, aspirants who have been vaguely interested in the spiritual but not committed to it can begin to get more committed. So we hope that, this 2019 through to 2027, spiritual aspirants of the world will say, I'm ready for the next phase, the next turn of the cycle. I'm going to use my free will well and move towards the rainbow bridge. Now, I've noticed when speaking to clients, for instance, who have Chiron and Aries, that independence is extremely a very important theme. Yeah, and of course, because Aries is part of the pair of Aries and Libra, we can't just do what's good for us. We have to consider the other person constantly. Now, some people with Chiron and Aries are extremely willful, and they really don't care what happens to other people. It's just looking after number one. But I've also noticed that some people with Chiron and Aries fail to pick up their independence and their initiative, and they're codependent, and they wait for other people to take the lead. And both of those are too extreme. Do we just look after number one, or do we go, oh, somebody else can lead me? And if you think about that on a humanity level, you say, well, what are humanity doing? Are we going off on our own trajectory willfully? That leads to anarchy. Or are we dropping our initiative and our free will and handing over that power and saying, well, when someone else leads, I'll follow? We become codependent upon someone else. What we need to do is find a balance somewhere in the middle between what is it that feels right for me and what is it that works for the group, for the family, and to be mindful of that. Because if we're afraid of initiating and taking change, well, we'll just be frozen and not go anywhere. But if we're totally self-motivated, then we may fail to realise that we're not the only ones involved in this what's happening on Earth. So we want neither this rampant self-focus. We'd prefer to have heart-based action. And that's the goal. And that's what humanity is being tested, I think, since 2019 and up until 2027. Okay. Okay, so let's have a look and see what's been going on. Well, I had a look at, I've got April 2018 there. I think it's possible because I don't think that's an error. I think what happens is Chiron can go forwards, can go direct and go retrograde. So it may well have been that it was actually there in 2018 and went forward finally in 2019. But what I noticed was that there were uprisings to do with democracy in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Now, I think that's quite interesting because of the rollout of the surveillance mechanism that's at least a decade ahead of the West in China. And Hong Kong and Taiwan were just going, okay, we would like to be free of the overarching control of the Communist Party of China. So that's one of the things that was occurring in those years, 2018, 2019. And then I was looking at what we call the cross quarters. This is when Chiron got to around the middle degrees of Aries, 15 degrees of Aries. And this is not that long ago, 2022 and 2023. And the 15th degree of Aries is, it's like, how to describe it? The cross quarters is like a person walking along their path and they get to the 15th degree and when they put their feet upon the 15th degree, they get more energy to jump forward. It's like a great leap forward, the opportunity for an awakening, for a transformational, 5 or 10 steps instead of one step. So did that happen? Did a lot of humanity wake up and take blindfolds off and see things for how they are in 2022 and 2023? Well, I think they did. Maybe people who for the first time had never really thought much about all kinds of issues. It could be health, could be welfare, it could be diet, it could be politics, whatever it is, but a general awakening and hopefully a recognition that if we blindly follow, then we don't use Chiron and Aries well, but we can't move in such a way that we have disregard for others. Okay, where we are now, here in the almost November 2025, Chiron's in the 25th degree of Aries, exactly square Jupiter in Cancer. And I talked about that a couple of weeks ago in terms of the need to say, well, where can I nurture? Where's my group, my family? Where do I give of generosity? Where are the people that I embrace to support them? Rather than taking a nationalistic, very parochial kind of an approach and saying, well, I'm looking after myself or my family. So so this Chiron square Jupiter that's running from now until I think it's January, can't exactly remember. It says, well, we can't just look after ourselves. We have to recognize where the group needs compassion, where the group will stand up and say, what's the middle path? And the other thing about the sign of Cancer is that if we fail to respond to the nurturing of humanity on a larger and broader level, and if we only think about the very insular Cancerian, then we end up not growing spiritually. We end up sort of going back into our shell. And so I think we're at a bit of a crisis between now and early 2026 in terms of this: who and how do we nurture? And what is it that we say no to? And who do we stand with in a middle approach? And then if I look at what's happening on the world scene, the thing that my eyes drawn to is the enormous uprising that's been going on in the UK and London to do with the overreaching of government. Okay, let's talk about the Chiron return. And for some people, it's when they're 49 years old, and for some people, it's when they're 50 years old. So it's always very useful to have a look and say, well, what happened in my Chiron return? What was the healing crisis? Where did I feel like my back was against the wall? Because there's a choice. Do I stay on this side of the Saturn side of the bridge, or do I put my foot on the bridge, on the rainbow path, on the path of of probationary, as we would call it theosophically. And so have a look and see, was there a healing crisis? Because it's an opportunity for consciousness raising. Yeah? But this doesn't happen easily. Generally, what happens with the Chiron return as we attempt to cross the rainbow bridge is the things that are not in harmony or not supportive of our higher self, they begin to collapse. So we can't hold on to structures that have previously been something we could cling to when there was a crisis. Things seem to collapse around us. It's a bit like, what's that analogy? You know, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall and all the king's horses, and, you know, the egg falls off the wall and you can't put the egg back together again. There's a transformational rebirth, and we need to move forward on a spiral level rather than weeping because the old life is broken. And we can't expect anyone to rescue us or help us. And so people who don't have an Aries energy, or maybe they've got Chiron in Aries but haven't picked up their own determination or discipline, they're at a loss. Well, who's going to save me? Who's going to fix the problems? Whereas in fact, we have to fix the problems. We have to be the ones that bring about our own self-healing, because this rebirth is taking us towards the sign of Scorpio. And at the moment, the sun's in Scorpio. And when Chiron was discovered in 1977, there were 4 planets in Scorpio. So this going through and being prepared to let things fall away is part and parcel of the deal. On an individual level, have a look at your own chart, sign, house, and aspect. And what's extremely important is to understand what tools or therapy work for you. Because one person with let's say Chiron in Gemini, they might function well by being able to use their hands or communicate, and that would be a way of healing themselves. Whereas a person with Chiron in Taurus might find that they need to have a modicum of security or a roof over their heads before they can be generous with other people's security. It varies enormously. This crossing of the rainbow bridge, because that's the opportunity before us all. Okay, so what I have here is the Chiron discovery chart, and around the outs, that's the inside circle. We talked about that earlier. And I've got the dates here for the Chiron return for humanity. Okay, so if you've gone through your own Chiron return at 49 or 50, maybe you've been able to identify what it was that was broken and what it was that represented the past path of healing. So that's the theme for these dates: 8th of June, 2027, 6th of April, 2028, and the 10th of January, 2029, because they are 3 triggers for the Chiron return. And I'll just explain it. So this outer circle here is for the current transits, where Chiron is right now. So Chiron's currently in this 24th degree of Aries. Yeah, and you see the 24 degrees of Cancer, that's the Chiron Jupiter square that I was talking about. Now, it's going to take us until the 8th of June, 2027, for Chiron to move from 24 Aries to 4 Taurus. But when it gets there, then humanity have the opportunity en masse to cross the rainbow bridge. But we can't do it unless we're prepared to sacrifice or to let go or to give up whatever the old security blanket was. And from the natal chart, the security blanket is something to do with the pot of gold, and something to do with money, and something to do with old habits, and something to do with moving beyond fear. And so these dates, and we don't just have one trigger. The Chiron return is exact on the 8th of June, exact on the 6th of April, and it's about a half a degree, I think, by the time we get to 2029. So I hypothesize that humanity will go through a fairly major transformational crisis in order to birth a new level of consciousness in 2027 and 2028. And of course, that's such a broad statement. You know, how I experience it and how you experience it and the different nations, well, that will all vary enormously. But these dates are true. This will be the Chiron return for humanity. So we're not very far away from it. Now, when Taurus is used by the soul rather than the ego, you see, Taurus on the ego's level has got a great deal to do with conflict, emotional conflict, physical conflict, feeling unsettled, not wanting conflict, trying to stay safe and feel safe. Whereas Taurus on an esoteric level, on a soul level, is deep, heartfelt conviction that is not tied to something external. So I guess what I'm saying here is that our survival as a human species is connected to our deep, heartfelt conviction associated with the spiritual realms. This doesn't matter whether you're a Buddhist or a Jain or a Christian or a lover of the earth or you know, agnostic, whatever, but there's a need to have a deeply held conviction that the realms of spirit exist within and that you have a capacity to access them in some form, because that's the bridge. Whereas if we think the security is going to come from the money in the bank or the job that we've currently got or the car or the status or the external wealth, the external pot of gold, it's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Okay. And I'm not going to talk very much about Chiron transiting Taurus. You can see that it'll take 8 years. And it first goes into Taurus in the middle of 2026. So in fact, even though the Chiron return is not until 2027, we're starting to get a taste of this, you know, what's real on a security level. Is money our security? Or is shared wealth, shared roofs, shared food, shared resources, whatever they are? And it goes for 8 years. I've put a few words here to do with the Taurus keynotes. We would hope that in that 8-year period from next year on, that the planet continues to be sustainable for life on Earth. Yeah, we would hope that in some way, shape or form, on the other side of this Chiron return, 27 and 28, maybe early 29, that we can find housing and shelter and food and livelihood for everyone, not just for the wealthy, not for the elite, not for those who have the power or the money. We need to share the resources. We need to respect the resources of the earth. And above all, we need to remember that Earth has a destiny to become a sacred planet. And nothing is sacred if it's not revered. Yes, because we have that first ray that I was talking about, that deep conviction of the divine within, yeah, and that's what we cling to. And if we fail to recognize that the divine within is our security going forward, well, then we've misunderstood 50 years of we've misunderstood fundamentally the 50 years of the Chiron's cycle. If you're new to the planet Chiron, Barbara Ann Clow is probably the person that I think of. She wrote a book somewhere in the 70s, I think, on Chiron. It's probably the classic, really. I've mentioned Chiron a little bit. Well, not so much Chiron, but I've talked a lot about the Rainbow Bridge in esoteric books, esoteric psychology books that Zachary and I have put together. This is a poem about Chiron. And if you're interested in, and that's an article on the path to peace. And if you're interested in the children's series Narnia, well, there's a link to it. So thank you for your attention, and I'm going to leave that there and